Today, we investigate an operation that shocked the world: the United States military abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on January 3, 2026. An extraordinary act that blurred the line between covert operations and outright invasion. Picture this: January 3, 2026, 2 a.m., Caracas, Venezuela. Over 150 U.S. military aircraft pierce Venezuelan airspace. Delta Force Special Operations troops descend on Maduro's compound. Helicopters hover above the presidential residence as explosions rock the capital. By 3:29 a.m. Eastern Time, Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores are aboard U.S. aircraft, headed to New York to face criminal charges of narco-terrorism and cocaine trafficking. What makes this operation unprecedented is not merely its audacity, it's that it was the culmination of a months-long military pressure campaign that included 150-plus U.S. warships deployed to Venezuelan waters. $50 million bounty on Maduro's head, aerial strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats, seizure of 5 oil tankers, and secret directives authorizing military force against drug cartels. But the operation exposed something darker. This wasn't about drugs, it was about oil. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, and once Maduro was captured, the U.S. immediately took control of Venezuela's oil industry, seized tankers, and established what amounts to an economic blockade and military occupation. Tonight, we expose Operation Absolute Resolve and investigate how the U.S. crossed a constitutional and international law Rubicon. August 2025, the military buildup begins. The operation didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of careful, deliberate planning that began 6 months earlier in August 2025. In August, President Trump signed a secret directive authorizing the Pentagon to use military force against select Latin American drug cartels. Simultaneously, the Trump administration began deploying massive military assets to the Caribbean region. U.S. Navy missile destroyers began circling Venezuelan territorial waters. Over 4,500 sailors and Marines were deployed aboard naval vessels. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was stationed in the Caribbean. Hundreds of combat aircraft were pre-positioned in the region. Delta Force Special Operations teams conducted surveillance and infiltration operations. CIA teams were embedded in Venezuela, tracking Maduro's movements and associates. Officially, this buildup was framed as an anti-drug campaign. Trump administration officials repeatedly claimed the military pressure was necessary to combat narco-terrorism and stop drug trafficking from Venezuela, but the actual objective was far more ambitious. In secret meetings with congressional leadership, administration officials outlined plans for a regime change, control of Venezuelan oil resources, and military occupation. The ideological justification: the cartel of the suns, to justify military action. The Trump administration needed to classify Venezuela as a terrorist threat, so they officially designated the Cartel of the Suns as a foreign terrorist organization, claiming Maduro led it. But investigative experts questioned whether this cartel even existed. The designation appeared designed specifically to provide legal justification for military action under Article 2 presidential powers, claiming authority to defend against terrorist threats without congressional authorization. September-December 2025, the escalation campaign Phase 1, maritime strikes. September-November 2025, the U.S. began conducting lethal airstrikes on boats allegedly used by drug traffickers in the Caribbean near Venezuela. Official statements claimed these were anti-narcotics operations. But the reality was darker. U.S. strikes killed at least 57 people in at least 16 separate operations, according to BBC reporting. Victims included alleged traffickers, but also fishermen and unconfirmed civilians. Phase 2. Oil tanker seizures, December 2025. The U.S. shifted tactics, seizing Venezuelan oil tankers on the high seas. On December 10, 2025, the U.S. seized the oil tanker Skipper Anact, Venezuela denounced as international piracy. By January 9, 2026, the U.S. had seized 5 oil tankers, most carrying Venezuelan crude to international markets. Each seizure was framed as disrupting narco-trafficking, but the real goal was clear: starving Venezuela of oil revenue. Phase 3. Land strikes and psychological pressure, December 2025. On December 29, 2025, Trump declared that U.S. forces had hit and destroyed a docking area on Venezuela's coast allegedly used by drug boats. the first known land strike in the military campaign. Simultaneously, Trump ramped up psychological pressure on Maduro, doubled the bounty for Maduro's capture to $50 million. From sure million, made repeated public statements threatening military intervention and regime change. Authorized covert operations, including attempts to recruit Maduro's pilots to defect. The intention was clear: break Maduro's will, create chaos within his regime, and set conditions for capture. January 3, 2026. Operation Absolute Resolve. By early January, the groundwork was complete. The military was in position. Intelligence networks were embedded. Psychological pressure was maximized. The operation was authorized. The raid, 2 a.m. to 3:29 a.m., on the night of January 2nd to 3rd, 2026, Trump issued the order. Over 150 U.S. military aircraft launched from Caribbean bases and transited toward Caracas. The attack sequence 2 a.m. Wave of airstrikes hit Caracas and surrounding areas, targeting military installations and security forces. 2:30 a.m. Delta Force and Special Operations teams inserted via helicopter into Maduro's compound. 2:40 a.m. Ground elements engaged security forces protecting Maduro. Fighting lasted approximately 20 minutes. 3 a.m. Maduro and his wife Celia Flores surrendered and were extracted. 3:29 a.m. ET. Both were aboard U.S. aircraft headed for the United States. The Venezuelan government claimed 100 people died, including Cuban military and intelligence personnel assisting Venezuela. U.S. officials reported the operation resulted in 0 U.S. casualties, but international reports suggested 40 to 57 Venezuelan and Cuban personnel were killed. The moment Maduro was captured, the U.S. moved with extraordinary speed to consolidate control. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was immediately sworn in as Venezuela's interim president with U.S. approval. The U.S. publicly rejected supporting Democratic opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, despite her widespread popularity. Instead, the U.S. installed a leadership structure it could control. Trump's public statements made abundantly clear: this was about oil. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced a 3-phase plan for Venezuela: stabilization, military control, and regime consolidation. Reconciliation, negotiation with remaining Chavista officials under military pressure. Transition, political restructuring under U.S. oversight, but Trump himself was more direct. At a press conference, he stated, "The United States will run Venezuela." He added that U.S. oversight would last for years.
Between January 3rd to 9th, the U.S. seized 5 additional oil tankers, establishing what amounted to a complete blockade of Venezuelan oil exports.
By January 9th, Trump posted on Truth Social, "The blockade on Venezuelan oil is now in full effect anywhere in the world." U.S. officials began negotiating oil sales with Venezuelans, essentially demanding control over the state oil company PDVSA in exchange for lifting the blockade. The operation stunned the international community. Within hours, Venezuela called an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, denouncing the U.S. action as a grave violation of international law. A group of UN experts declared that the Trump administration's actions constituted illegal armed aggression under international law and violated Venezuela's right to self-determination. Russia condemned the seizure of oil tankers, calling it a gross violation of maritime law and demanding release of crew members. China, India, Brazil, and the African Union expressed serious concerns about the precedent being set. Legal experts raised fundamental questions about constitutional authority. The Trump administration justified the operation under Article 2 presidential powers, claiming authority to defend the country against terrorist threats the Venezuelan drug cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations. No congressional authorization was obtained for the operation. The operation went far beyond self-defense into offensive military action and regime change. The narco-terrorism justification was thin. As Maduro wasn't charged with drug trafficking in the U.S., he was charged with importing cocaine into the United States. A distinction that matters legally. Trump's own legal advisors suggested the operation demonstrated extraordinarily broad authority that modern presidents exercise over military force. But others warned, this set a catastrophic precedent. Any president could now unilaterally invade any nation, justify it as counterterrorism, and face no congressional check. Political analysts describe Trump's Venezuela operation as the Putinization of U.S. foreign policy: muscular, unilateral, dismissive of international law, and focused on expanding great power dominance. The operation signaled to global adversaries like China and Iran that the U.S. was prepared to use military force unilaterally. International law would not constrain U.S. action. Allies like Russia and China should expect similar treatment if they challenged U.S. interests. Some analysts saw this as exactly what Trump intended, a proof of concept that demonstrated U.S. willingness to use force against regional adversaries. Maduro and Cilia Flores were transported to New York and arraigned in federal court on charges of narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, conspiracy, and possession of machine guns. Both pleaded not guilty. In initial statements from his jail cell, Maduro denounced the operation as a coup and a violation of international law. For his capture, Venezuelan Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello had explicitly warned that Venezuela would resist with asymmetrical warfare. If they mess with Venezuela, that war won't last 2 days or 3 or 4 or 5. It will be 100 years of war, but we will defeat them, he said, invoking the example of Vietnam. This warning suggested that even with Maduro captured, significant resistance could emerge. By January 9th, interim Venezuelan government, operating under U.S. military pressure and surveillance, had already begun making concessions. Political prisoners were released, including opposition figures. Venezuelan officials began negotiating oil sales with the U.S. under duress. Security forces were purged of Chavista loyalists. Each concession demonstrated how complete U.S. control had become. The ultimate question: what happened on January 3, 2026 represented an unprecedented act in modern geopolitics. The unilateral military abduction of a sovereign nation as president by another nation. The U.S. justified this as counterterrorism, but the operation revealed itself to be regime change and resource seizure. The stated goal was controlling drug trafficking, but the actual outcome was U.S. military occupation and control of Venezuela's oil industry, the world's largest proven oil reserves. What do you think? Did the Trump administration have legitimate justification to invade Venezuela militarily? Does the narco-terrorism designation justify bypassing congressional authorization? Should presidents have unilateral authority to conduct military operations of this scale? And most critically, what precedent does this set for how the U.S. will treat other nations that don't comply with American interests? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into Operation Absolute Resolve, the military abduction of a foreign president, and seizure of a nation's resources disturbed you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Conspiracy, and ring the bell. Next time, we'll investigate the long-term consequences. Will Venezuela descend into guerrilla warfare? Will this inspire similar military operations globally? Until then, stay vigilant. And remember that when superpowers abandon international law, the consequences ripple across the entire world.